"This is just great, Elena," she muttered to herself, her voice a small, trembling thing in the vast quiet. Her photography project, the one meant to capture the serene transition from dusk to twilight, had led her hopelessly astray. The path she'd followed had simply dissolved into a tangle of ferns and ancient roots. A twig snapped behind her, a sharp, definitive crack that was not made by the wind. Elena froze, her camera feeling like a useless block of lead around her neck. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She turned slowly, her eyes straining to pierce the deepening gloom. And then she saw them, eyes, dozens of them, glowing with a hungry, yellow light, emerging from the ink-black shadows between the trees. A low growl rumbled through the air, vibrating in her bones. A pack of wolves. Not the majestic creatures she'd hoped to photograph from a safe distance, but gaunt, desperate predators, their ribs showing even in the dim light. They were closing in, a silent, creeping crescent of teeth and hunger. Fear, cold and absolute, seized her. She took a clumsy step back, her boot catching on a root. She stumbled, falling hard onto the damp earth. This was it. This was how it ended. A scream built in her throat, raw and terrified, but it was swallowed by a deafening roar that erupted from the trees to her right. It wasn't a wolf. It was something else entirely, larger, more powerful. A colossal shape burst from the undergrowth, a blur of silver and gray fur moving with impossible speed. It was a wolf, but it was unlike any she had ever seen. It was immense. Its shoulders as high as her waist, its fur the color of moonlight on polished steel, its eyes burned with a fierce, intelligent gold. It didn't hesitate. It launched itself into the pack of smaller wolves, a whirlwind of controlled fury. Snarls and yelps of pain filled the air as the massive wolf fought with a brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and breathtaking. It moved like a dancer, a predator of unparalleled grace and lethality. One by one, the other wolves were thrown back, broken and whimpering, until they finally scattered, melting back into the shadows from which they came. The clearing fell silent again. Save for the sound of her own ragged breathing and the heavy panting of her rescuer, the great wolf stood over her, its massive chest heaving. It lowered its head, and for a terrifying moment, she thought it was her turn. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the teeth never came. Instead, she heard a sound that didn't belong in the wild, a soft, pained groan, followed by the sickening crackle of shifting bones. Her eyes flew open. The wolf was changing, its form twisted, contracting, its fur receding into pale skin. Bones reshaped themselves with audible cracks. In seconds, the magnificent beast was gone. In its place knelt a man. He was naked, his body a canvas of lean, powerful muscle, slick with sweat and dotted with a few shallow cuts that were already beginning to heal. He ran a hand through his thick, jet-black hair, pushing it back from a face that was impossibly, unnervingly beautiful. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and lips that looked like they were carved from marble. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same eyes from the wolf, a startling, molten amber that seemed to glow with their own inner light. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, something that looked like disbelief. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, like the rumble of distant thunder. It wrapped around her, strangely soothing despite the impossible situation. Elena could only stare, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. A man had turned into a wolf, or a wolf had turned into a man. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The trees began to spin, the amber of his eyes the only fixed point in her tilting world. I think, she managed to whisper, before the darkness finally claimed her, and she knew no more. Damien watched her crumple to the ground. His heart and organ he often felt was made of stone, lurching painfully. He had felt it the moment he saw her. A shock, like lightning. That had nothing to do with the fight. A resonant hum that vibrated in the very core of his soul. It was a feeling spoken of only in legends, a myth he had long since dismissed. The soul bond. It couldn't be. Not with a human. But as he gently lifted her limp form into his arms, her scent, lilacs and rain, and something uniquely her, filled his senses. And he knew. The legends were true, and his world had just been irrevocably, terrifyingly, wonderfully shattered. Elena awoke to the soft crackle of a fire and the scent of pine and brewing coffee. She was lying on a plush leather sofa, covered by a thick wool blanket. Her head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache behind her eyes. For a blissful moment, she thought it had all been a nightmare, the glowing eyes, the fight, the impossible transformation. Then she saw him. He was sitting in an armchair across the small, rustic cabin, watching her. He was dressed now, in a simple gray t-shirt and dark jeans that did little to hide the powerful physique she had seen in the woods. The firelight danced across his sculpted features, making his amber eyes glow like embers. The nightmare was real, and it was devastatingly handsome. Panic clawed at her throat. She sat up abruptly, the blanket pooling in her lap. "Who are you? Where am I?" He didn't move, his gaze steady and intense. "My name is Damien. You're in my cabin in the Blackwood. You fainted. I brought you here." His voice was calm, but it held an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite place. Authority. Power. You were a wolf," she whispered, the words sounding insane even to her own ears. A flicker of something regret, perhaps crossed his face. "Yes." The single, unapologetic word sent another jolt of fear through her. This wasn't a hallucination. "What are you—" He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. The movement was fluid, graceful, predatory. "What you saw is what I am. I'm a werewolf. My family, my pack, has lived in these woods for generations." Elena shook her head, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. "Werewolves? Right, of course. And I suppose vampires sparkle in the sun." She pushed herself off the sofa, her legs shaky. "I need to go. I need to call someone." "Your phone is on the table," he said, gesturing with his head. "The battery is dead, and there's no reception out here anyway. Please, Elena, sit down. I know this is a lot to take in." She froze. "How do you know my name?" "It was on the ID in your wallet. I was looking for emergency contacts." The explanation was logical, but the way he said her name felt intensely personal, as if he'd known it his entire life. She sank back onto the sofa, defeated. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. "This is crazy. I'm dreaming. I hit my head when I fell." "You did hit your head," Damien said softly, his voice losing some of its edge. "But you were not dreaming." He stood and walked toward the small kitchen area, moving with that same unnerving silence. He returned with a mug of steaming coffee, holding it out to her. "Here." Her hand trembled as she took it, her fingers brushing against his. A spark, a literal jolt of electricity, shot up her arm. She gasped and nearly dropped the mug. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, his amber eyes widening in surprise. "What was that?" she breathed. He stared at his hand, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "It's complicated. There are things about my kind you don't understand." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "When I saw you in the woods, when I saved you, I felt something, a connection. In our world, we have a name for it. You are what we call a soulmate. My soulmate." Elena stared at him, the coffee forgotten in her hands. "Soulmate. You think I'm your soulmate because you turned into a giant dog and I fainted. I think you've been watching too many fantasy movies." A muscle twitched in his jaw. He was clearly not used to being contradicted. "It's not a choice. Elena, it's a fact. It's why I was able to find you. It's why your scent is intoxicating. It's why I have this overwhelming primal urge to protect you." This was too much. She stood up again, placing the mug on the table with a clatter. "Look, I appreciate you saving me from those other wolves. I do, but I'm not anyone's soulmate. I'm a photographer who got lost. I need you to take me back to town, now." He sighed, a deep, frustrated sound. He saw the disbelief warring with the fear in her beautiful green eyes. He had to show her. He had to make her understand. "All right," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You want proof." He held up his right hand. Elena watched, mesmerized and horrified, as his fingernails thickened, darkened, and elongated into wicked, black claws. Then he met her gaze, and his eyes, those captivating amber orbs, shifted. The pupils narrowed into vertical slits, and the color deepened into a brilliant, burning gold. It was the last piece of the wolf, the predator, staring out at her from a human face. Elena's breath hitched. Her bravado crumbled, replaced by a profound, soul-shaking awe. It was real, all of it. "I will take you home," Damien said, his voice a low purr as his eyes and hands returned to normal. "But you need to understand, my world has found you now, and I will not let you go." The drive back to the city was a silent, tension-filled affair. Damien had provided her with a spare charger for her phone, and as the notifications pinged to life, the surreal encounter in the woods began to feel like a distant, feverish dream. But then she would glance over at the man beside her, his strong hands resting casually on the steering wheel of his sleek black SUV, and the reality would crash back down. He kept his promise and dropped her off, asking for nothing but her phone number. "So, I know you're safe," he'd said, his golden eyes searching hers. Hesitantly, she had given it to him. For 2 weeks, she tried to forget. She threw herself into her work, editing the photos from Blackwood, all taken before the wolf attack, and tried to convince herself it was a stress-induced hallucination. But it was no use. She felt his absence like a physical ache, a phantom limb she never knew she had. The world seemed duller, quieter. And then he started appearing. The first time, she was leaving a late-night editing session at her studio. A man was following her, his footsteps too close, too deliberate. Just as a spike of real fear pierced her, Damien's SUV pulled up to the curb. He got out, not even looking at the other man, and simply opened the passenger door for her. "Get in, Elena." The would-be mugger had vanished into the night. Damien had simply driven her home, the air thick with unspoken questions. Another time, a heavy piece of scaffolding came loose from a building just as she was walking underneath. Before she could even react, a powerful arm wrapped around her waist, yanking her back against a hard chest. "Damien." He held her for a moment, his heart thudding against her back, his breath warm on her neck. "You need to be more careful," he'd murmured, his voice tight with emotion, before disappearing into the crowd. He wasn't stalking her, he was protecting her. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She texted him, "We need to talk." He replied instantly, "I'll pick you up in an hour." He took her not to a coffee shop, but to a sprawling, magnificent estate on the edge of the city, hidden behind a high stone wall and a thick grove of trees. "Thornhill Manor," he said, as if that explained everything. Inside, she met his younger brother, Adrian. He had the same dark hair as Damien, but his eyes were a warm, friendly brown, and his smile was easy and genuine. "So you're the one," Adrian said, his eyes twinkling. "My brother has been completely unbearable for the past 2 weeks. It's a relief to finally meet you." "Adrian," Damien warned, though there was no real heat in his voice. Adrian waved him off. "She deserves to know. The soul bond is a very big deal. Elena, it's the stuff of legend. An alpha finding his destined mate. It solidifies his power. It completes him. They spent hours talking. Damien, with Adrian's help, explained the history of the Thornhill Pack, the hierarchy, the laws that govern their secret society. Elena found herself not afraid, but fascinated. This hidden world was vibrant, ancient, and alive, and at the center of it was Damien, a man of immense power and responsibility who looked at her as if she were the center of his universe. That night, he walked her through the gardens of the manor. The moon was full and bright, casting a silver glow over everything. It bathed Damien's face in ethereal light, making him look like a god from some ancient mythology. "I know this is overwhelming," he said, his voice soft. "I'm asking you to accept something impossible." "It's not as impossible as I thought," she admitted, her gaze fixed on his. "When you're not here, I feel like something is missing. It's a feeling I've had my whole life, growing up alone, but now I know what was missing." He stopped walking. Turning to face her, he gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. The touch was electric, sending a cascade of shivers down her spine. "Elena," he breathed, his amber eyes dark with an emotion so intense it stole her breath. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. She leaned in to meet him, her eyes fluttering shut. His lips met hers, and the world fell away. The kiss was tentative at first, a soft exploration, but then the bond between them ignited. It was a current of pure energy, a fire that raced through her veins. His arms slid around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate, as if he'd been starving for centuries and she was his first taste of life. She tangled her fingers in his thick, soft hair, kissing him back with a ferocity that surprised them both. She could feel his power, his essence, pouring into her, and she gave him all of her own fear, her loneliness, her dawning love in return. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other, under the light of the full moon. Elena Rossi finally understood. She wasn't just falling for a man, she was falling into a destiny she never knew she had. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of secret dates and stolen moments. Their worlds, once so separate, began to weave together. Damien would visit her studio, his powerful presence a stark, beautiful contrast to the quiet creativity of her space. He would watch her work for hours, his gaze intense and appreciative. She learned that behind the stoic alpha facade was a man who understood art, who could discuss light and composition with a surprising depth of knowledge. In turn, she entered his world. They had picnics deep in the Blackwood, in the very forest where they first met. It was no longer a place of fear for her, but one of wonder. Damien, in his element, was breathtaking. He taught her how to track animals, how to read the language of the trees, how to feel the pulse of the wild, sometimes, when they were completely alone. He would transform. She would run her hands through his thick, silvery fur, look into his intelligent golden eyes, and feel no fear, only a profound sense of connection. He was magnificent. He introduced her to Dr. Sophia Chen, a human doctor and researcher who was one of the pack's most trusted allies. Sophia was a sharp, kind woman in her 40s with a sad wisdom in her eyes. "What you two have is beautiful," Sophia told Elena during a private meeting, "but it's not without its dangers. The bond between a werewolf and a human can be intense, unpredictable. Be careful. Elena, love is a powerful force, but so is instinct." Elena took the warning to heart, but it did little to dampen the love that was blooming, fierce and unstoppable. In her heart, she had never felt so seen, so cherished, so completely and utterly safe. The deep-seated fear of abandonment that had haunted her since her childhood in the orphanage began to fade, replaced by the certainty of Damien's devotion. For her 21st birthday, Damien did something that left her speechless. He had secretly bought a small, independent art gallery and arranged a solo exhibition of her work, the Blackwood Collection. On opening night, the gallery was filled with influential critics and buyers. Her photographs sold out within the first hour. She was no longer just a struggling artist. She was a success. Later that evening, after the last of the guests had departed, he took her to the top of the highest mountain overlooking the city, the same peak where she had once tried to capture the sunset. The moon was a perfect, glowing orb in the velvet sky. 3 months ago, my life was shades of gray. Elena, Damien said, his voice thick with emotion as he took both of her hands in his. I had duty, responsibility, power, but I didn't have color. You brought the color back into my world. He knelt down on one knee, and her heart stopped. He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not with a diamond, but with a rare, luminous moonstone, flanked by 2 small, intricately carved silver wolves with tiny amber chips for eyes. Elena Rossi, he said, his own amber eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You are my soulmate, my Luna, my everything. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally choked out. Yes, Damien, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms. But this time, his kiss was different. It held the promise of forever. He tilted her head back, his gaze locking with hers, a silent question in his eyes. She knew what he was asking. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He lowered his head to the juncture of her neck and shoulder. She felt the sharp prick of his canines against her skin, not painful, but a jolt of pure energy. It wasn't a bite to harm, but a mark, a claim, a seal on their bond that resonated deep within her soul. In that moment, under the watchful eye of the moon, she became his, and he became hers, completely and for all time. The bliss of their engagement lasted for one perfect, sun-drenched week. It was a bubble of pure happiness, where the only things that mattered were their love and the future they planned to build. But bubbles, by their very nature, are fragile, and this one was about to burst. Damien chose to tell his father. Victor Thornhill, in the patriarch's imposing oak-paneled study, Elena stood by his side, her hand held tightly in his, drawing strength from his presence. Victor was an older, harder version of his son. His hair was streaked with silver, and his amber eyes held none of Damien's warmth. They were chips of cold, hard stone. He listened in silence as Damien announced his intention to marry Elena, his expression unreadable. When Damien finished, the silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Victor rose from his massive desk and walked to the window, his back to them. A human, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. After all the years of training, of teaching you the importance of our lineage, of the purity of the Alpha bloodline, you bring a human into this house and declare her your Luna. She is my soulmate. Father, Damien said, his own voice tight with controlled anger. The laws of nature chose her for me. The laws of nature are for beasts. Victor spun around, his face a mask of fury. We are more than that. We have a society, a legacy to protect. Humans are fragile, weak. They break, they die. A Luna must be a source of strength for the pack, not a liability. He strode to a bookshelf and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound tome. He slammed it onto the desk, opening it to a page filled with grim, spidery handwriting. The Sinclair Alliance, 1888. Alpha Marcus Sinclair took a human mate. She was killed by rival wolves within a year, and his grief drove him mad, nearly destroying his entire pack. The Crestwood disaster. 1924. A human Luna, unable to handle the strain of the bond, betrayed her pack to hunters. Dozens were slaughtered. History is littered with the failures of these unions. This is different, Damien insisted, stepping in front of Elena protectively. Elena is stronger than you know. Strength has nothing to do with it, Victor roared. She cannot give you a pure-blooded heir. She cannot lead the hunt on a full moon. She cannot command the respect of other alphas. She will be a chain around your neck, dragging you and this entire pack into ruin. He pointed a trembling finger at Damien. I forbid this. If you marry this girl, I will challenge your right as alpha. I will call a council meeting. The elders will not support this. They will not allow a human to rule beside you. Then I will give it all up, Damien declared, his voice ringing with conviction. The title, the power, this house, it means nothing to me without her. Elena gasped. She looked at Damien, at the fierce determination on his face, and her heart ached with a mixture of love and terror. She was seeing for the first time the true cost of their love, the chasm between his world and hers. Victor's eyes narrowed into slits. So be it, he snarled. The council will be convened. We will see if your love is strong enough to survive the judgment of your pack. Damien was called away on urgent pack business to the Northern Territories, an emergency Victor had almost certainly orchestrated. He left reluctantly, making Elena promise to stay within the manor grounds with Adrian as her guard. He won't dare try anything while I'm gone, Damien had assured her. He was wrong. Victor didn't use force. He used words, wielded with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He found Elena in the rose garden, her sanctuary of peace within the formidable estate. I admire your courage, girl Cess, he began, his tone deceptively mild. But courage is no substitute for wisdom. He held out a thin file. I want you to see something, not history books, medical records. Hesitantly, Elena opened it. Inside were photographs and lab reports, pictures of small, misshapen infants, autopsy notes detailing genetic deformities, organs that failed to develop, short, painful lives. The offspring of human werewolf unions, Victor said, his voice cold and clinical. Hybrids, abominations, for every one that survives. 9 die in agony, or are born so monstrous they must be put down. Is this the future you want for your child? For Damien's heir, a game of genetic roulette. Elena's stomach churned. The images were horrific. She felt a wave of nausea and slammed the folder shut. Sophia, Dr. Chen never mentioned this. Dr. Chen is a sentimentalist, blinded by her own past tragedies. Victor scoffed. These are the facts Damien has sheltered you from, the ugly truth of your love story. He then slid a check across the table, a check with so many zeros she couldn't even process the number. Leave. Disappear. I will tell him you changed your mind. He will be hurt, but he will heal. He will lead his pack as he was born to do. Elena pushed the check back, her hands trembling with rage. My love is not for sale. Victor's eyes hardened. Very well, but perhaps your friend's well-being is... He produced another photo. It was of Marcus, her best friend from the city, laughing outside his studio. Mr. Bennett, a talented photographer, it would be a shame if a tragic accident in his darkroom were to damage his hands, or worse. The threat hung in the air, vile and suffocating. Elena stared at him, horrified. This was the true nature of the man behind the powerful alpha. Her next tormentor was far more subtle. A beautiful woman with fiery red hair and intelligent green eyes introduced herself at the pack's communal dinner. Isabella Sinclair, she said, her smile dazzling. It's such a pleasure to finally meet the woman who's captured our alpha's heart. Isabella was charming, witty, and disarmingly friendly. She spoke of her childhood friendship with Damien, sharing funny anecdotes that made Elena feel like an outsider. She subtly highlighted the things they had in common, the thrill of the hunt, the politics of the packs, all the parts of Damien's life Elena could never share. It must be so difficult, Isabella said one afternoon, her voice laced with false sympathy. To love a man like Damien, he has such powerful instincts, a wildness, sometimes, I wonder if a human can ever truly understand that part of him without being afraid of it. Isabella's words found their mark later that week. She accidentally led Elena to the pack's training grounds from a hidden vantage point. Elena watched Damien spar with 3 of his best warriors. It was not sparring. It was a brutal, bloody display of dominance. This wasn't the gentle, loving man who discussed art in her studio. This was the alpha. His eyes were pure gold, his face contorted in a predatory snarl. He moved with lethal speed, breaking bones with sickening crunches, his body a weapon of terrifying power. He was magnificent, yes, but he was also terrifying. For the first time, Elena felt a sliver of genuine fear, not of him hurting her, but of the untamable beast that lived inside the man she loved. Victor's warnings, the horrific photos, Isabella's insidious words, they all began to swirl in her mind, creating a vortex of doubt and terror. Was she strong enough for this world, or would her love end up destroying them both? The world tilted on its axis 2 weeks later in the sterile, white confines of a doctor's office. The persistent nausea she'd blamed on stress was something else entirely. She was pregnant. 6 weeks. 6. Elena sat in her car in the clinic's parking lot, staring at the ultrasound photo Dr. Chen had given her. It was just a tiny, flickering speck on the screen. But it was a life created from her love for Damien. A wave of fierce, protective joy washed over her, so potent it made her gasp. She was going to be a mother. Then, the cold dread returned, gripping her heart like a fist of ice. She remembered the photos Victor had shown her. Abominations. Genetic roulette. The risks are real. Elena. Sophia had told her, her face grave. A hybrid pregnancy is unpredictable. The baby will be strong, but their developing body will be a battleground between 2 different sets of DNA. You will need constant monitoring. Elena's joy curdled into terror. She wanted this baby more than anything in the world. But what if Victor was right? What if she brought a child into the world only for it to suffer? She drove to the manor, determined to tell Damien. He was her partner, her soulmate. They would face this together. He would choose her, choose their baby, over his title. But as she approached his study, she heard raised voices. Damien and Victor. She froze outside the door, her hand on the knob. The council has given you an ultimatum, Damien. Victor's voice was like granite. You know the ancient law. No alpha can be seen as weak or divided in his loyalty. They will not accept a human Luna and a questionable heir. They will accept who I tell them to accept, Damien roared back, the sound vibrating through the thick wooden door. Don't be a fool. You are putting your own selfish desires above the well-being of hundreds of werewolves who depend on you. You were born for this, bred for this. It is your duty. There was a heavy pause. You have to make a choice. Son, it's either the pack or it's the human. You cannot have both. Elena's blood ran cold. You cannot have both. The words echoed in her mind, a death knell for the future she had dreamed of. If she told Damien about the baby, he would not hesitate. He would choose them. He would abdicate his role as alpha, abandon his birthright, his entire life. For them, the pack would be thrown into chaos. He would be seen as a failure, a cautionary tale. He would resent her. He would resent their child. He would lose everything that made him him. Tears streamed down her face as she backed away from the door, her hand protectively covering her stomach. She couldn't do that to him. She loved him too much to destroy him. There was only one way. She had to make the choice for him. She had to disappear. She had to save him from herself, and she had to protect the tiny, flickering life inside her from a world that would never accept it. Her decision was a shard of ice in her heart, but it was absolute. She had to leave. That night, the sky wept. A cold, relentless rain lashed against the windows of Thornhill Manor, mirroring the storm in Elena's soul. She found Damien in the library, staring into the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid untouched in his hand. He looked up as she entered, and his tense expression softened into a smile that tore her heart in two. "Elena, I've been looking for you." He stood and crossed the room, his long strides eating up the distance between them. He reached for her, but she took a step back. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of confusion. What's wrong? Every word she was about to say was a lie, a betrayal, a venomous poison she had to force from her lips. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Damien, I can't do this." "Can't do what, he asked, his voice laced with a growing unease. He could feel her distress through the bond, a cold, sharp pain that made no sense. "This," she said, waving a hand to encompass the grand room, the manor, his entire world. "Us. I'm not cut out for this. The secrets, the danger, the pin to wolves." She forced a shudder. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it was exciting. But it's not. It's terrifying." He stared at her, his amber eyes searching hers, trying to find the truth. "That's not what you said on the mountain. You accepted me. You accepted all of me." "I was caught up in the moment," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "It was a fantasy. But this is reality, and I don't belong here." She pulled the moonstone ring from her finger. The skin beneath felt cold and bare. "I can't be your Luna." He looked at the ring in her outstretched hand as if it were a snake. He didn't take it. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "I don't believe you. Something has happened. Did my father—" "This has nothing to do with your father," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. She had to make him believe it. She had to make it hurt enough that he would let her go. "This is about me, and it's about someone else." That got his attention. His head snapped up, a dangerous golden light flaring in his eyes. "Someone else." "Marcus." She whispered the name of her oldest friend, the cruelest lie of all. "He's been there for me my whole life. He's human. He's safe. He's the one I should be with. I'm sorry. Damien, I was just curious about your world, but my heart has always been with him." The pain that flashed across his face was so profound, so utterly devastating, that she almost broke. He staggered back a step, clutching his chest as if she had physically stabbed him. The soul bond, their sacred connection, was screaming in agony. He could feel her love for him, a raging inferno, even as her words tried to extinguish it. It was a contradiction that was tearing him apart. "You're lying," he growled, his voice a broken thing. "Elena, look at me and tell me you don't love me." She couldn't. If she met his eyes, she would shatter. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. "I never loved you," she whispered, the lie sealing her fate. She shoved the ring into his hand, her fingers cold and numb. "Goodbye, Damien." She turned and fled, not daring to look back. She ran past a shocked Adrian in the hall, whispering a desperate, "Don't tell him," before she burst out of the heavy front doors and into the pouring rain. She didn't hear him fall to his knees in the library. She didn't hear the sound of his fist smashing into the marble fireplace. But as the bus she'd called pulled away from the gates of the manor, a sound pierced the night, rising above the storm. It was a long, mournful, heart-shattering howl of pure, untamed anguish, the sound of a soul being ripped in two. Elena clutched her flat stomach, silent tears streaming down her face, and whispered to the tiny life within her, "I'm so sorry. I did it to protect you both." The small coastal town of Willowbrook was a world away from the grandeur and danger of Thornhill Manor. Here, life moved at the gentle pace of the tides. Elena Rossi, now 28, had carved out a quiet existence for herself and her son, Ethan. Their small cottage, filled with the scent of sea salt and developing chemicals from her in-home darkroom, was a haven of peace. Ethan, at 6 years old, was her entire world. He had her slender build and fine features, but his hair was a dark, unruly mop of black, and his eyes were a perfect, startling replica of his father's. A warm, intelligent amber that sometimes, in the right light, seemed to glow with a life of their own. He was a bright, curious boy, preternaturally observant and deeply compassionate. He also had strange quirks. He could smell cookies baking from 3 blocks away. His hearing was so sharp he'd complain about the loud buzzing of fluorescent lights. And when he got into a tussle on the playground, the other boy had ended up with a sprained wrist from a simple push. Elena knew these were the first whispers of his heritage, and it filled her with a constant, low-level anxiety. To Ethan, his father was a hero who had died before he was born. It was a kinder lie than the truth, a story that protected him from a world he wasn't ready to face. Her old friend Marcus was a frequent visitor. He had moved to a nearby town a few years ago, providing a steady, supportive presence in their lives. He knew the truth about Damien and had fiercely guarded Elena's secret to the residents of Willowbrook. He was the almost stepdad, the man who was clearly in love with the quiet photographer, though she never seemed to return the sentiment. "You can't hide forever, Elle," Marcus said one sunny afternoon, as they watched Ethan happily chasing seagulls on the beach. "I'm not hiding," she replied, her gaze fixed on her son. "I'm protecting him." "He's starting to ask questions, real questions," Marcus pressed gently, "about his father, about why he's different." Elena sighed. She knew he was right. The walls of her carefully constructed world were beginning to feel thin. That evening, a letter arrived that threatened to bring them crashing down. It was an invitation from the prestigious Lumiere Gallery in New York City, offering her a major solo exhibition. It was the kind of career-defining opportunity she had only dreamed of, a chance to give Ethan a better life, a future with more security. But it was in New York, the city she had fled, the city that was the heart of Damien Thornhill's empire. 7 years, she thought. It had been 7 long years. Surely, he had moved on. Surely, he had forgotten her. He was an alpha. He would have found a new mate, a proper werewolf Luna, and started a family by now. The thought sent a familiar pang of jealousy and loss through her, one she had learned to ignore but could never fully extinguish. For Ethan's sake, she had to take the chance. She would go back, just for the exhibition. They would be in and out before anyone even knew they were there. It was a risk, but it was one she had to take. New York was a sensory assault after the quiet tranquility of Willowbrook. The city buzzed with an energy that was both exhilarating and exhausting. Elena and Ethan moved into a small temporary apartment, and she threw herself into preparing for the exhibition. She had told herself that Damien was a ghost from another life, but the city itself seemed to be haunted by him. The Thornhill Industries logo was everywhere on skyscrapers, on delivery trucks, on advertisements in Times Square. His empire had grown, his influence spreading like a shadow over the city. The night of the gallery opening was a blur of flashing cameras, polite conversation, and champagne glasses. Elena felt a world away from the woman she was 7 years ago. More confident and self-assured, her work was being celebrated, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of pride. Ethan was staying with Marcus for the evening, safe and sound. She was in the middle of a conversation with a prominent art critic when a sudden hush fell over the room. The ambient chatter died down, replaced by a palpable tension. A presence had entered the gallery, a shift in the very atmosphere of the space. Elena knew who it was before she even turned around. The familiar scent of pine and winter air, a scent she had tried desperately to forget, cut through the cloying perfume of the crowd. She turned slowly, her heart beginning a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. And there he was, Damien Thornhill. He was 32 now, and the years had sharpened him, honing his breathtaking beauty into something harder, more dangerous. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. A light scruff of a beard shadowed his strong jaw, and his black hair was a little longer. Brushing the collar of his shirt, he was still the most beautiful man she had ever seen. But the warmth she remembered in his eyes was gone. They were still the same molten amber, but now they were cold, guarded, and utterly devoid of emotion. He was no longer just an alpha. He was a king in his domain, and his gaze swept over the crowd with an air of absolute authority. Then his eyes found hers. Across the crowded gallery, their gazes locked. For a single, infinite moment, the world stopped. The noise, the people, the city, it all faded away into nothing. There was only him and her, the bond between them, dormant for 7 years, flared to life with the violence of a supernova, a jolt of recognition and pain and longing so intense it made her knees weak. She saw a flicker of something in his cold eyes, shock, disbelief, and then a raw, predatory blaze that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. He had found her, or rather, she had foolishly walked right back into the lion's den. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Elena tried to focus, to smile, to talk to people, but her awareness was singularly fixed on Damien. He didn't approach her. He simply stood at the edge of the room, a silent, imposing predator, his gaze never leaving her. It was a look of possession, of a claim being reasserted. As soon as the last guest departed, one of the gallery staff approached her. "Ms. Rossi, Mr. Thornhill would like to speak with you in the private viewing room." It wasn't a request. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as she walked down the hall. She found him standing in front of her centerpiece photograph, a hauntingly beautiful shot of the moon rising over the blackwood. "You have a good eye," he said, his voice a low, chillingly calm baritone. It lacked the warmth she remembered. It was the voice of a CEO, a commander. "But then, I always knew that." "What are you doing here, Damien?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to face her, his 6'2" frame seeming to fill the entire room. "What am I doing here? This is my gallery. Elena, Thornhill Industries acquired it 3 years ago." He took a step closer, and she had to fight the instinct to retreat. "A better question is, what are you doing here after 7 years of silence? 7 years of nothing." "It's a business opportunity," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It has nothing to do with you." A humorless smile touched his lips. "Everything in this city has something to do with me. I've been looking for you, for 7 years. I have had private investigators scouring every small town, every city block, and all this time. You were hiding in plain sight." He took another step, closing the distance between them. The air crackled. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that intoxicating scent. The bond pulsed between them, a living thing, crying out for reunion. "I wasn't hiding," she lied. "I moved on." "Did you?" he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He lifted a hand and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin, and that familiar jolt, stronger than ever, shot through her. He felt it too. His eyes darkened, the gold flaring to life. The bond doesn't lie. "Elena, it's still there, frayed and damaged by your rejection, but it's there. I felt it every single day for 2,555 days, a constant hollow ache." He leaned in, his lips close to her ear. "And I can still smell my scent on you. Faint, old, but it's there. You've been with no one else." It was a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership that sent a shiver down her spine. "That doesn't mean anything," she said, her voice breathy. His gaze dropped, becoming analytical, sharp. "You've changed. You're a mother. I can sense it. I saw the pictures in your portfolio, a little boy." His eyes snapped back to hers, and they were no longer the eyes of a former lover. They were the eyes of an alpha wolf on the hunt. There's something about him, a scent, faint. Through the photographs, familiar. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. He was too perceptive, too powerful. "He's not your concern," she said, forcing herself to stand her ground. Damien's expression hardened into granite. "You ran from me. You lied to me. You shattered my world and disappeared without a trace. From this moment on, Elena, everything about you is my concern." He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "You cannot run from me again. I will find out the truth. I promise you that." Elena spent the next 3 days in a state of high alert, feeling like a cornered animal. She knew Damien was watching her. She could feel his presence like a storm gathering on the horizon. She considered packing her bags and running back to Willowbrook, but she knew it was pointless. He wouldn't let her go this time. On the 3rd day, desperate for a semblance of normalcy, she took Ethan to Central Park. They were throwing a frisbee on the great lawn when a shadow fell over them. "That's a good arm you've got there," a deep voice said. Elena froze. Ethan, however, beamed up at the tall, handsome stranger who had appeared as if from nowhere. "Thanks," Ethan said cheerfully. "I'm going to be a baseball player when I grow up." Damien smiled. A genuine, breathtaking smile that was aimed entirely at the little boy. It was a smile Elena hadn't seen in 7 years, and it made her heart ache. "I bet you will be," he said, crouching down to Ethan's level. "I'm Damien. What's your name?" "I'm Ethan." He stuck out a small hand, and Damien shook it with grave formality. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ethan." Damien's gaze was fixed on the boy, an intense, searching look. He was taking in the unruly black hair, the determined set of his small jaw, and above all, the warm amber eyes that were a mirror of his own. "Mom, can Chu Damien play with us?" Ethan asked, using the respectful Vietnamese term for uncle that Elena had taught him from a book. Her heart twisted. Before Elena could protest, Damien was already part of their game. He threw the frisbee with an effortless grace, laughing as Ethan leaped to catch it. He bought them ice cream, listening with rapt attention as Ethan chattered on about his favorite dinosaurs and his love for drawing. Elena watched, her stomach in knots. It was so natural, so right. The resemblance between them was more than just physical. It was in the way they moved, the way they smiled, the way they both tilted their heads when they were concentrating. A father and a son, who had never met, falling into an easy rhythm as if they had known each other forever. Ethan, who was usually shy with strangers, was completely captivated. At one point, he looked up at Damien with wide, serious eyes. "You smell like the forest after it rains," he said matter-of-factly, "and like my mom's favorite blanket." Damien's composure cracked, his eyes widened, and he stared at the boy, speechless. He knew that scent. It was the scent of his own cabin, the place where he kept the single blanket Elena had used, the only tangible thing he had left of her. The afternoon sun was beginning to set when Damien walked them back towards their apartment building, after Ethan ran ahead. Damien turned to Elena, his face a mask of cold, hard certainty. The time for games was over. "He has my eyes, Elena." His voice was dangerously soft. "He has my smile. He even has the same ridiculous allergy to strawberries that I do. I saw him pick them out of his ice cream." He took a step closer, his gaze pinning her in place. "He is 6 years old. He smells like my pack. He smells like me. He's my son. Isn't he?" The question wasn't really a question. It was a verdict. And looking into his blazing amber eyes, Elena knew there was no more room for lies. The dam of lies she had so carefully constructed for 7 years broke that night. Damien didn't shout. He didn't demand. He simply followed her up to her apartment and waited until Ethan was asleep, then stood in her small living room, an immovable force of nature. and waited. "Yes," she finally whispered into the suffocating silence. "Ethan is your son." The single word seemed to suck all the air from the room. Damien closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. The confirmation, the raw, unvarnished truth, hit him like a physical blow. When he opened his eyes again, they were shimmering with a maelstrom of emotions, pain, fury, and a profound, bottomless grief. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking on the single word. "Why would you keep my own child from me? Why would you let me believe you betrayed me, that you never loved me?" The story poured out of her then, a torrent of fear and desperation. She told him about Victor's threats, about the horrifying medical files, about the impossible choice she heard through his study door. "He said you had to choose," she cried. Tears she'd held back for years finally streaming down her face. "The pack or me. He said you couldn't have both. I couldn't let you lose everything because of us. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me," he finally exploded, his voice a roar of pure anguish that made the windows rattle. "You didn't protect me. Elena, you destroyed me. Every day for 7 years I have woken up believing the woman I loved, my soulmate, threw me away like I was nothing. Every night I have been haunted by the memory of you walking away. You let my own father poison my memory of you." He paced the small room like a caged tiger, his power radiating in waves, making her feel small and fragile. "You stole 7 years from me. 7 years of his life. I missed his first word, his first steps, his first day of school. I missed everything. You took my son from me. I did it to protect him," she sobbed, clutching her arms around herself. "From your father, from a world that would see him as a monster, an abomination. I did what I thought was right." "You thought was right," he snarled, whirling to face her. "You had no right to make that decision alone. He is my son, my blood, my heir, and you raised him in hiding like a dirty secret." The argument raged, a hurricane of 7 years of pain, misunderstanding, and repressed love. It was raw, ugly, and heartbreakingly necessary. Finally, exhausted, they fell silent, the air thick with the wreckage of their words. Damien walked over to the doorway of Ethan's room. He stood there for a long time, just watching his son sleep. The moonlight from the window illuminated the boy's face, so peaceful, so innocent. Elena saw his broad shoulders shake. She watched, stunned, as Damien Thornhill, the powerful, unbreachable alpha, leaned his head against the doorframe and wept, silent, gut-wrenching tears for the years he had lost, for the son he had never known, and for the love he had thought was a lie. He finally turned back to her, his face streaked with tears, his amber eyes raw with pain but shining with a new, unshakable resolve. "This changes nothing between us," he said, his voice hoarse. "You and I have a long way to go, but he nodded towards Ethan, "is my son. I will be in his life, whether you want me there or not. I will protect him, and I will protect you, even if you hate me for it for the rest of your life." The aftermath of the revelation was a minefield of tense negotiations. They met in the sterile, neutral territory of a lawyer's office, two broken people trying to piece together a future for their son. "I want him to know me, Elena," Damien stated, his voice firm. "I want him to understand his heritage. The werewolf gene will awaken in him. Whether we like it or not, it's already starting. Isn't it the heightened senses, the strength? He needs an alpha to guide him through it, or it could be dangerous for him and everyone around him." His solution was simple, and in his mind, logical. "You and Ethan will move into Thornhill Manor. He will be protected there, surrounded by his pack. I can train him, and you—" "No," Elena cut him off, her voice shaking but resolute. "Absolutely not. I will not raise my son in that house, with your father under the same roof. I will not have him exposed to that hatred and judgment." They argued for hours. their lawyers looking on with weary patience. Finally, they reached a fragile compromise. Elena would retain full custody, but Damien would have unrestricted visitation rights. He would begin to slowly introduce Ethan to his heritage, keeping the full truth of the werewolf world a secret for now. It was an uneasy truce, a temporary solution to an impossible problem. Elena tried to return to her life, but it was no longer hers to control. Damien was a constant, powerful presence. He arranged for Ethan to be enrolled in the city's most exclusive private school. He had a state-of-the-art security system installed in her apartment building. He was weaving himself into the fabric of their lives, and she was powerless to stop him. A week later, she was called into a meeting with the board of directors for the Lumiere Gallery. They explained, incredibly impressed with the success of her exhibition. They were offering her the position of artistic director for the entire gallery. It was a dream job, an incredible salary, a secure future for her and Ethan. She was ecstatic until she saw the final page of the contract and noticed the name of the chairman of the board who had recommended her for the position, Damien Thornhill. Rage, hot and potent, flared in her chest. She stormed out of the meeting and drove straight to Thornhill Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of black glass that pierced the sky. She bypassed security, using the access card he'd given her for emergencies, and burst into his penthouse office. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city that was his kingdom. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "How dare you?" she seethed, slamming the contract down on his enormous desk. "You think you can just buy me, arrange my life like I'm one of your corporate takeovers?" He turned to face her, his expression calm. "I am securing my son's future, and yours. You are the mother of the Thornhill heir. You will not want for anything. I don't want your money. Damien, I want my life, the life I built for myself." "The life you built was based on a lie," he countered, his voice dangerously soft as he walked toward her. "A life of hiding and just getting by. You are capable of so much more. I am simply removing the obstacles." "You are the obstacle," she cried in frustration. "You don't get to control me." "When it comes to the safety and well-being of my son," he said, stopping just inches from her, his nearness making her head spin, "I get to do whatever I deem necessary." His gaze was intense, unwavering, a silent promise that he was now a permanent part of her world, and there was nothing she could do to change it. The first full moon since Damien's return was a night of terror. Ethan woke up screaming. Elena rushed into his room to find him thrashing in his bed, his small body rigid with pain. His skin was burning hot, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead. "My head hurts," he cried, his voice strained. "Make it stop, Mommy." Elena's blood ran cold when she saw his eyes. The warm amber had been replaced by a glowing, feral gold. The wolf was stirring inside him. Panicked, she did the only thing she could think of. She called Damien. He was there in less than 10 minutes, moving with a speed that defied the city's traffic. He took one look at the suffering child, and his alpha instincts took over. He gently pushed Elena aside and sat on the edge of the bed, his presence immediately filling the room with a sense of calm authority. "Ethan, look at me," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He placed a large, cool hand on Ethan's forehead. "Breathe with me, in and out. That's it. Focus on my voice." Ethan's frantic movements began to slow. His breathing, which had been ragged and shallow, started to deepen, matching the steady rhythm of Damien's. "It's just energy, son," Damien murmured, his voice weaving a spell of tranquility. "Too much of it. The moon is pulling at you, like the tide. You don't have to fight it, you just have to guide it. Feel it in your hands, in your feet, let it flow through you, not get stuck in your head." Elena watched in amazement. Damien was using his alpha power, a non-verbal projection of calm and control, to soothe the storm inside his son, under his touch. The feral gold in Ethan's eyes softened, receding back to their familiar amber. The feverish heat on his skin subsided. Damien began to hum, a low, ancient melody that Elena had never heard before. It was a lullaby in a language she didn't understand, but the love and protection in the notes were universal. Ethan's eyelids grew heavy, and within minutes, he was fast asleep, his small hand clutching Damien's thumb. Damien didn't move. He stayed by his son's side, a silent guardian against the powerful pull of the moon. Elena sank into the armchair in the corner of the room, her anger and resentment from the past week melting away, replaced by a wave of profound gratitude. She had tried for 7 years to protect Ethan on her own, to be everything for him. But tonight, she was forced to admit a painful truth. There were parts of her son she would never understand, dangers she could never shield him from alone. He needed his father. He needed the alpha. When the sun finally began to lighten the sky, Damien gently extracted his hand from Ethan's and stood up, his joints stiff. He looked over at Elena, his face weary but his eyes soft. "He's going to be okay," he said quietly. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know." She took a deep, shaky breath, finally surrendering. "Okay, Damien, you win. Tell me what we need to do. Tell me how to help our son." Damien insisted that the best way to start integrating Ethan was a family dinner at Thornhill Manor. Elena agreed with deep reluctance, her body tensing as they drove through the familiar iron gates. The house was just as imposing as she remembered, a monument to centuries of power and tradition. Adrian greeted them at the door, his smile warm and genuine as he swept his nephew into a bear hug. "I knew it," he whispered to Elena, his eyes shining. "I always knew there was more to the story. I'm so glad you're back." The warmth of the reunion was short-lived. As they entered the grand dining room, a woman rose to greet them. It was Isabella Sinclair. She was even more beautiful than Elena remembered, dressed in an elegant emerald green dress that complemented her fiery red hair. "Damien, darling," she said, gliding over to him and placing a proprietary kiss on his cheek. She then turned her dazzling smile on Elena. "Elena, how wonderful to see you again. And this must be the famous Ethan." She knelt down, her smile never faltering. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Elena's blood turned to ice. She looked at Damien, a silent, frantic question in her eyes. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Elena," he said, his voice low, "Isabella and I, we are engaged." The word hit Elena with the force of a physical blow. Engaged. Of course. 7 years. He had moved on. It was stupid and selfish of her to think he would have waited. But knowing it and seeing it were two different things. The soul bond screamed in protest, a sharp, jealous pang that took her breath away. The dinner was an exercise in torture. Victor Thornhill was present, his disapproval a cold, suffocating blanket over the entire table. He ignored Elena completely, focusing his attention on Ethan with a disturbing, clinical curiosity. Isabella, meanwhile, played the perfect future Luna. She was gracious, attentive to Damien, and sickeningly sweet to Ethan, all while subtly marking her territory. "Damien and I have been waiting so long to unite our packs," she said, placing her hand on his arm. "It's a matter of duty. Of course, for the good of our people." She looked at Elena, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Some things are just bigger than personal feelings, aren't they?" Later, when Elena found a moment alone with Damien on the terrace, she confronted him. "Engaged. You're engaged to her." "It's a political alliance. Elena, nothing more," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Victor arranged it years ago to merge the Thornhill and Sinclair packs. It was a business deal. There are no feelings involved." "She seems to think there are," Elena shot back, the jealousy she had no right to feel making her voice sharp. "I will handle Isabella," he said, his gaze intense. My duty to the pack is one thing, but you need to understand this." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, possessive murmur that sent shivers down her spine. "You are still my soulmate. That ring on her finger means nothing. You are the only one I have ever, and will ever, consider to be my mate. You are the mother of my son. You are the Luna of this pack, whether you want the title or not." His words should have been comforting, but they only made things more complicated. She looked back into the dining room, where Isabella was laughing at something Victor said. She felt like an intruder, a complication in a life that had moved on without her. As she drove away from the manor that night, Ethan's innocent voice piped up from the back seat. "Mommy, if Damien is my dad, why isn't he marrying you? That other lady isn't as pretty as you." Elena's heart broke all over again. "It's complicated, sweetie," she whispered, not knowing who she was trying to convince, him or herself. In a study far grander and colder than the one at Thornhill Manor, Isabella Sinclair swirled a glass of red wine, the deep crimson liquid matching the murderous glint in her eyes. Victor Thornhill sat opposite her, his face a thunderous mask. "He's bringing her back into the fold," Isabella spat, her voice tight with fury, "the human and her half-breed brat. He looks at her, and it's like the last 7 years never happened." "Patience, Isabella," Victor said, his voice a low rumble. "Damien is driven by two things, duty and his cursed bond. Right now, the bond is pulling him back to that woman. We must give him a reason to choose duty." "And the boy?" Isabella asked. "The boy is the anchor that moors him to her. As long as the child exists as a werewolf, Damien will feel obligated to protect them both." Victor's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Precisely. So we must remove the anchor." He rose and walked to a hidden safe behind a painting. He returned with a small, lead-lined box. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was a syringe filled with a pale, shimmering liquid. "What is that?" Isabella breathed, her eyes wide. "Something my ancestors developed centuries ago, for emergencies, for traitors. It's called the lunar serum." Victor explained, "It attacks the lycanthropic gene in an adult. It would cause immense pain and permanently sever their connection to the wolf. In a child, a hybrid, the results are more unpredictable. It could simply erase his werewolf side, making him fully human. Or," he added, with a chilling nonchalance, "it could create a fatal conflict between his two natures. His body would tear itself apart from the inside out." Isabella stared at the serum, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. "If the boy is no longer a werewolf, Damien loses his alpha's duty to train him. He becomes nothing more than the human's bastard son, a weakness, a reminder of his past folly." "Exactly," Victor confirmed. "We will not be the ones to administer it. Of course, that would be too obvious. We will make it look like the mother's doing." "How?" "We will plant the seeds of doubt. We will create a narrative. Elena, the terrified human mother, afraid of the monster her son is becoming. She obtains the serum, a desperate attempt to cure him, but in her ignorance, she gives him an overdose." "It's brilliant," Isabella purred, her mind already spinning with the possibilities. She would be there to comfort Damien in his grief. She would be the strong, pure-blooded Luna he needed to lead the pack, to put this unfortunate chapter behind him. She would finally have everything she had ever wanted: the power, the position, and the man she had been obsessed with since she was a girl. She picked up the syringe, the cold glass feeling like a scepter of power in her hand. The life of a small boy was nothing compared to the glorious future that awaited her. The weekends became a new routine. Damien would pick up Ethan for what he called special nature lessons in a private, protected section of the Blackwood. Worried but determined to be involved, Elena insisted on coming along. From a distance, she would watch Damien teach their son. It was nothing short of magical. He taught Ethan how to quiet his mind and extend his senses, to hear the heartbeat of a field mouse under the leaves, to smell an approaching rainstorm an hour before it arrived. He taught him not to fear his growing strength, but to control it, to be gentle. After the lessons, they would fall into an easy domesticity that felt both strange and deeply familiar. They would go back to Damien's cabin, the same one where he had first taken her, and make lunch together. They would sit by the fire while Ethan drew, his sketchpad filled with surprisingly accurate drawings of wolves and forests. The walls Elena had built around her heart began to crumble, brick by brick. The cold, intimidating CEO she had met at the gallery was gone, replaced by the Damien she had fallen in love with. He was a patient, adoring father, and with her, he was gentle, attentive, and fiercely protective. The tension between them began to melt, replaced by the comfortable silence of shared history and the undeniable pull of the bond. They talked for hours, not about the painful past, but about the 7 years they had missed. She told him about Ethan's first words, kitty, his first scraped knee, his fierce love for picture books. He told her about the endless board meetings, the lonely nights in the manor, the hollow ache of her absence that had become his constant companion. One evening, after they had tucked a sleeping Ethan into the cabin's spare room, they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. "I never stopped looking for you," Damien said quietly, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. "Even when I thought you hated me, even when my father and Isabella, even when everyone told me to move on, I couldn't." He turned to look at her, his amber eyes glowing in the dim light. "I've never stopped loving you, Elena. These past 7 years, I wasn't really living. I was just existing, waiting, hoping I would find you again." Her breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of regret for the years they had lost, for the pain she had caused him. "I never stopped loving you, either," she whispered, the confession a balm to both their souls. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. It was the same tender gesture he had used the night of their first kiss. He leaned in slowly, giving her the space to refuse, to pull back. She met him halfway. The kiss was not like their first, which had been full of fire and discovery, nor was it like the one on the mountain, full of promise and forever. This kiss was one of reunion. It was gentle, searching, full of 7 years of unspoken words, of heartache, and of a love that had refused to die. It was a promise of a second chance, a forgiveness, a homecoming, the soul bond. So long strained and pained, flared between them, bright and whole and breathtakingly powerful. For the first time in 7 years, Elena felt like she was truly home. The fragile peace of their reunion was shattered the following Tuesday. As Elena left the Lumiere Gallery after a long day, she felt it again, the unnerving sensation of being watched. She scanned the crowded street, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, shaking it off as paranoia. She hurried toward the subway. The feeling persisted all week, a car that seemed to be parked outside her apartment building a little too often, a man in a trench coat she saw near Ethan's school 2 days in a row. She mentioned it to Damien, who immediately became grim and alert. The proof came that Friday. Marcus had come to the city to visit, and he was walking with Elena to pick up Ethan from school. As they rounded the corner, they saw a black sedan parked across the street. 2 men were inside, their faces hard, their eyes fixed on the school's entrance. "Stay here," Marcus said, his friendly demeanor vanishing, replaced by a steely competence Elena had never seen. He casually crossed the street, pretending to be on his phone, and walked past the car, angling his screen to snap a photo of the license plate. He sent the photo to a contact, and the reply came back in minutes. "The car is registered to a shell corporation," he told Elena, his face pale. "One owned by Sinclair Industries." "Isabella." A cold dread washed over Elena. She immediately called Damien. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Get Ethan. Go straight home and lock the doors. I'm on my way." But they weren't fast enough. As Elena and Ethan were halfway home, the black sedan screeched around the corner, cutting them off. The two men got out, moving with a predatory speed that was not human. Werewolves. "The Alpha wants the boy," one of them snarled. Elena shoved Ethan behind her, her heart pounding with primal terror. "You're not taking him!" Suddenly, Marcus was there, stepping between them. A heavy-duty camera tripod wielded like a weapon. "Get back!" It was a brave but futile gesture. One of the werewolves backhanded him, sending him flying into a wall where he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Just as they lunged for Elena and Ethan, a silver blur shot past them. Adrian Thornhill. He had been assigned by Damien as their unseen escort. He engaged the two Sinclair wolves. A flurry of motion and snarls. He was good, but he was outnumbered. One of the attackers caught him off guard, sinking his claws deep into Adrian's side. Adrian cried out in pain and staggered back. Just as the remaining wolf reached for a terrified Ethan, a black shape descended from the sky. Damien, in his full, magnificent wolf form, landed on the pavement with a ground-shaking thud. He was no longer the controlled alpha. He was fury incarnate. His roar of pure rage echoed off the buildings as he launched himself at the attackers. The fight was short and brutal. Damien was a force of nature, an avenging angel of claws and teeth. The Sinclair wolves, recognizing a fight they could not win, shifted and fled. Damien immediately turned his attention to Adrian, nudging him with his nose, a low whine of concern in his throat. Elena rushed to Ethan, pulling him into a fierce hug. Her son was shaking, his eyes wide with shock and terror, having witnessed the true violent nature of his father's world for the first time. Damien shifted back, not caring who saw him. He knelt by his brother, his face a mask of anguish and fury. Then he looked at Elena, his eyes blazing. "This ends now," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You and Ethan are moving into the manor. Tonight, I will not let her get to you again." Thornhill Manor felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. Damien, using the full, undisputed power of his alpha command, had silenced all overt objections to their presence. Elena was given a luxurious suite of rooms, with Ethan's adjoining his own, but the welcome from the pack was chilly at best. Some of the younger members, who admired Damien's modern approach, were friendly and curious, but the older generation, loyal to Victor and the old ways, watched her with open suspicion and contempt. They saw her as a human weakness, the source of the Alpha's distraction and the reason for the attack on Adrian, who was now recovering slowly in the pack's infirmary. Victor, though confined to his own wing of the manor under Damien's orders, was a poisonous, unseen presence. His influence still held sway over the more traditionalist members of the pack. And then there was Isabella. She appeared the day after they moved in, feigning shock and concern over Adrian's injuries. "Oh, you poor things," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she approached Elena. "To have been caught up in such a thing. These rogue elements are such a problem. I'm so glad Damien is keeping you safe here." Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were cold, hard, and filled with a triumphant hatred. She had lost the battle, but she was telling Elena, clear as day, that the war was far from over. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrents of pack politics, was enthralled by the manor. He loved the vast library, the sprawling grounds, and most of all, spending time with his recovering Uncle Adrian, who adored him instantly. He was a bright spot of innocence in a house heavy with secrets and resentment. For Elena, the nights were the hardest. She lay awake in the ridiculously large canopy bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house. She could feel the weight of hundreds of werewolves living under the same roof, their lives and loyalties a complex. invisible web. She felt Damien's presence through the walls, a constant, powerful hum from his room down the hall. He was so close, yet they were worlds apart. One night, unable to sleep, she walked out onto her balcony. She could see the lights of the city in the distance, a world she no longer felt a part of. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Damien standing in the doorway. "You're not sleeping," he stated softly. "I feel like I'm in a fishbowl," she admitted. "Everyone is watching me, waiting for me to fail." He came to stand beside her, his warmth a welcome comfort in the cool night air. "Let them watch," he murmured, his gaze fixed on her face. "You are stronger than all of them. You just don't know it yet." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her arm. The simple touch sent a jolt of longing through her, so powerful it made her dizzy. She wanted to lean into him, to find solace in his arms. But she couldn't. Not here. Not in this house where she was the enemy. "I don't know if I can do this, Damien," she whispered. "You can," he said with absolute certainty. "You are the mother of my son. You are my mate. This is your home now. And I will burn it to the ground before I let anyone make you feel unwelcome." Victor Thornhill was not a man to be sidelined. Using his remaining influence, he invoked an ancient law, forcing Damien to convene a formal pack council in the manor's great hall. The hall was a vast, intimidating space, with a vaulted ceiling and walls lined with the stern-faced portraits of past Thornhill alphas. Dozens of pack members filled the room, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. At the head of the room, on a raised dais, sat the pack elders, led by a wizened, imposing werewolf named Malcolm Whitmore. His eyes, a pale, intelligent gray, seemed to see right through Elena. Damien stood before them, proud and defiant, with Elena and Ethan by his side. "I have brought my mate, Elena Rossi, and my son and heir, Ethan Thornhill, home," Damien announced, his alpha voice ringing with authority. "They will live among us, under my protection. They will be respected as part of my family and as part of this pack." A murmur of dissent rippled through the crowd. An older warrior stepped forward. "Alpha, she is human, and the boy, he is a half-breed. Our laws have been clear for centuries. The alpha bloodline must remain pure." "Our laws are outdated," Damien countered. "My son is a Thornhill. His blood is my blood, and Elena is my soulmate, chosen not by me but by fate itself. She is the rightful Luna of this pack." The hall erupted in arguments. Victor watched from the sidelines, a smug look on his face. This was exactly what he had wanted. Then Isabella stepped forward, her expression one of grave concern. "Perhaps there is a compromise," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "We cannot deny the alpha his chosen mate, nor his son, but a Luna must prove her worth. She must prove she has the strength and spirit to stand beside an alpha." She turned to the elders. "I propose Elena undergo the ancient trials, the trials of the moon." A collective gasp went through the room. The trials were a barbaric relic of the past, designed to test the mettle of a potential Luna. They were grueling, dangerous, and hadn't been invoked in over a century. Malcolm Whitmore stroked his gray beard, his eyes fixed on Elena. "The trials are severe, especially for a human. They involve a test of survival, of spirit, and of courage. 3 days and nights, alone in the cursed wood, hunted by the pack's most feral enforcers, followed by an ordeal during the full moon." It was a death sentence. "No," Damien growled, stepping in front of Elena. "I forbid it." "You cannot, Alpha," Malcolm said, his voice quiet but firm. "Isabella Sinclair has invoked the old law. The council has the right to demand a trial. The choice does not lie with you. It lies with her." All eyes turned to Elena. The entire room was silent, waiting. She felt the weight of their judgment, their prejudice. She looked at her son, who was clutching her hand, his small face filled with fear. She had to protect him. She had to secure his place in this pack, so he would never be seen as an outcast. She lifted her chin, her green eyes meeting Malcolm's without flinching. "I accept the challenge." A shocked silence fell over the hall, broken only by Damien's furious, disbelieving whisper, "Elena, no." But it was too late. The challenge had been issued, and it had been accepted. The 5 days leading up to the trial were the most intense of Elena's life. Damien, furious but bound by the council's decision, turned his anger into a relentless drive to prepare her. "They want to break you," he said, his voice grim, as he led her to the pack's private training grounds. "We will not let them." He and Adrian became her personal drill sergeants. They taught her basic self-defense, how to use her smaller size and agility against a larger opponent. They spent hours in the forest, teaching her survival skills, how to build a shelter, find clean water, set simple traps, and identify edible plants. Damien, drawing on his own wolf senses, taught her to be aware, to listen to the forest, to smell the air, to think like a predator and not like prey. Dr. Sophia Chen arrived, her face etched with worry. She gave Elena a small kit containing a potent salve that could mask her human scent for short periods, and a series of herbal injections to boost her stamina. "This is insane, Elena," she said, "but if you're going to do it, you're going to have every advantage I can give you." Even Marcus snuck onto the property one night, risking the pack's wrath. He pressed a small waterproof GPS tracker into her hand. "For emergencies only," he whispered. "I'm not letting you go in there without a lifeline." Ethan was her constant shadow, his small face a mixture of fear and awe. He would sit and watch her practice archery, his drawing shifting from happy wolves to a lone human woman being guarded by a great silver wolf. His belief in her was a silent, powerful source of strength. But the most important lessons were not physical. They were about the wolf mind. You cannot outrun them or outfight them. Damien explained, you must outthink them, understand their nature. A wolf respects strength, but it also respects spirit. Do not show fear, even when you are terrified. Project confidence. You are their Luna. You must act like it, even before they accept you as such. He also taught her their weaknesses. The scent of wolfsbane was an irritant, a deterrent, and silver. Silver could cause them real pain. He gave her a small, sharp silver knife. "A last resort," he said, his voice heavy. The night before the trial, the training was done. They sat in her room, the silence thick with unspoken fears. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if he could physically impart his strength into her. "You have to survive this, Elena," he whispered into her hair, his voice raw with emotion. "You have to come back to me, to us." She tilted her head back, and he captured her lips in a kiss that was desperate, fierce, and full of love. It was a kiss that said everything they couldn't put into words. This was more than a trial. This was a battle for their future. That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms. He lay beside her, his arms wrapped around her, a solid, warm presence in the darkness. They made love with a slow, desperate intensity, a reaffirmation of their bond, a silent prayer against the dangers of the dawn. He marked her again, a gentle bite on her shoulder, a renewal of his claim. "You are mine," he murmured against her skin. "You are the Luna of Thornhill. Remember that. Let the bond guide you. Let it keep you safe." As she lay in his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back, she knew she wasn't just fighting for her own life. She was fighting for him, for Ethan, for the family she had never had, and would not let anyone take away from her. The cursed wood earned its name. It was a tract of ancient, untamed forest on the far edge of the Thornhill territory, a place where the trees grew too close together, blocking out the sun, and the ground was a treacherous web of roots and thorns. It was here that the pack sent their criminals for exile, and where they're most feral, least predictable wolves were allowed to run free. Elena was brought to the edge of the woods at dawn. She was given a single backpack with a water skin, a flint and steel, the silver knife from Damien, and the clothes on her back. Damien stood beside her, his face a mask of stone, but she could feel his terror and love pouring through the bond, a warm current in the cold morning air. The goal is the sunstone altar at the heart of the woods, Malcolm Whitmore announced. Survive for 3 days and 3 nights and reach the altar by the 3rd sunset. 10 of our enforcers will hunt you. They are forbidden from killing you, but they will not make it easy. They will test your body, your mind, and your spirit. May the moon goddess guide you. With a final, lingering look at Damien, Elena turned and walked into the oppressive gloom of the forest. The moment she crossed the threshold, a chorus of howls erupted from deep within the trees. The hunt had begun. She spent the first few hours moving quickly and silently, just as Damien had taught her. She didn't follow paths. She moved through the thickest undergrowth, using the skills she'd learned to cover her tracks. She found a small stream and refilled her water skin, rubbing the damp, pungent mud along her arms and neck to help mask her scent. By midday, she knew she was being followed. A twig snap here, a rustle of leaves there. They were toying with her. She found a small, defensible overhang beneath a rock outcropping and decided to make her first stand. She laid out a pouch of dried wolfsbane Damien had given her. As the first wolf, a brutish gray male, burst into the clearing, she threw the powder into its face. The wolf yelped, sneezing and shaking its head in confusion, giving her just enough time to scramble up the rock face to a higher ledge. Nightfall brought a new level of terror. The forest came alive with sounds, and the howls of her hunters sounded closer, more menacing. She found a tall, ancient oak with low-hanging branches and climbed as high as she could, wedging herself between 2 thick limbs. Sleep was impossible. She clutched the silver knife, her senses on high alert, as the glowing eyes of her pursuers watched her from the shadows below. She thought of Ethan's trusting face, of Damien's desperate kiss, and hardened her resolve. She would not break. The second day was a grueling test of endurance. Elena was exhausted, hungry, and her nerves were frayed raw. She kept moving, forcing her aching muscles to obey. Late in the afternoon, they cornered her, 5 of them, their teeth bared, their growls vibrating in her chest. They had her trapped in a small clearing. There was no escape. Remembering Damien's training, she didn't run. She stood her ground, holding her silver knife, her eyes meeting the gaze of the lead wolf, but she also used the terrain. While they were focused on her, she kicked a small, loose rock, triggering a miniature landslide of stones and dirt from the unstable cliff beside them. It was enough of a distraction. She darted through a momentary gap in their circle, thorns and branches tearing at her clothes and skin, but she was free. She didn't get away unscathed. One of the wolves had lunged, its claws leaving 4 deep, burning gashes in her calf. Limping and losing blood, she stumbled onward, despair beginning to creep in. Just as she thought she couldn't take another step, a wolf appeared in front of her. It was a she-wolf, smaller than the others, with fur the color of snow and intelligent blue eyes. Elena braced herself for another attack, but the wolf simply sat down and watched her with a curious head tilt. Instead of attacking, the wolf let out a soft whine and nudged Elena's good leg with its nose before turning and trotting down a barely visible trail. Hesitantly, Elena followed. The she-wolf led her to a hidden spring of clear water bubbling from the ground. It was a peace offering, a sign of respect. Elena realized then that not all the pack was against her. Some were watching, testing, and perhaps even helping. Night fell, and a cold rain began to pour, shivering and weak. Elena sought shelter. She stumbled in the dark, her injured leg giving way, and tumbled into a deep crevice, her head striking a rock. When she awoke, she was in a small, dry cave. The she-wolf was curled up near the entrance, a silent guardian. Exploring the cave with a makeshift torch, Elena found something remarkable. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, depicting the history of the pack, and she saw a carving that made her heart stop: a great alpha wolf, standing side by side with a human woman, a crown of leaves on her head. She hadn't been the first. Tucked into a small nook in the rock, she found a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. It was the diary of Luna Evangeline, the human mate from the carving, written over 200 years ago. As Elena read by the flickering torchlight, she found a kinship with this woman from the past who had faced the same prejudice, the same trials. They do not understand that my love for him is my strength, not my weakness. Evangeline had written, "To love a wolf, one must have a wolf's heart." The words resonated deep in Elena's soul. Hope, fierce and bright, rekindled within her. She was not an anomaly, she was a part of this pack's history. On the third day, Elena emerged from the cave with a renewed sense of purpose. Her leg throbbed, but her spirit was iron. She followed the sun, knowing the altar was near. The white she-wolf, her silent companion, trotted at her side. The other hunters had fallen back, their howls now sounding less like threats and more like calls of encouragement. She finally reached a large, sun-dappled clearing. In the center stood a massive, flat-topped boulder covered in ancient runes, the sunstone altar. She had made it, but her trial was not over. Blocking her path was the last challenger. It was the alpha of the Cursed Woods' feral wolves, a monstrous beast with scarred fur, one blind eye, and a reputation for untamable savagery. He was the pack's final, brutal test. The feral alpha snarled, saliva dripping from his jowls, and charged. Elena stood her ground. She dropped her knife. She would not meet brutality with brutality. She remembered Damien's words. "Don't fight with strength. Fight with your soul. You are their Luna." She closed her eyes and reached for the bond connecting her to Damien. She didn't pull strength from him. Instead, she opened her own heart, her own soul, and pushed her own energy out. She projected not fear, not aggression, but an overwhelming wave of love for the pack, for its traditions, for its future. She projected the unshakable certainty that she belonged here. She projected the calm, fierce, protective authority of a Luna. The feral alpha skidded to a halt just feet from her. Confused by the unexpected wave of emotion, he shook his massive head. Growling low in his throat, Elena opened her eyes and met his gaze, unafraid. She did not see a monster. She saw a warrior, a protector of his territory. Slowly, respectfully, she lowered herself to one knee and bowed her head in a gesture of submission, not to him, but to the spirit of the pack he represented. It was a move he did not expect. The great wolf circled her, sniffing the air. He could smell no fear, only a strange, compelling power. He let out a low, questioning whine. Then, to the astonishment of the hidden watchers, the untamable feral alpha lowered his head and licked her hand before sitting back on his haunches. A loyal guardian, he had accepted her. Elena rose and walked the final few steps, placing her hand on the sunstone altar just as the sun set, bathing the clearing in a fiery orange glow. She had done it. A moment later, a silver blur burst into the clearing. Damien. He didn't slow down, crashing into her, his arms wrapping around her in a desperate, crushing hug. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling with relief. Elena felt the hot wetness of tears on her neck and realized the great alpha of the Thornhill pack was crying. "You're safe," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You came back." She clung to him, exhausted but victorious, her heart soaring. "I told you I would." The pack was waiting when Damien carried a triumphant, albeit battered, Elena back to the manor. The entire great hall was filled. The mood was no longer hostile, but one of stunned, reverent silence, word of her victory, of how she had tamed the untamable feral alpha, not with force, but with spirit, had spread like wildfire. Malcolm Whitmore stood before the assembled pack, his face solemn. Elena Rossi has faced the trials of the moon and has emerged victorious. She has shown the strength of body, the courage of mind, and the spirit of a true Luna. He raised his voice. The council recognizes her. Do you, the Thornhill pack, accept this woman as your Luna? A single, powerful howl of affirmation rose from the crowd, shaking the very foundations of the manor. It was a unanimous chorus of acceptance. Elena looked out at their faces and saw not suspicion, but respect. She had earned her place. Isabella stood in the corner, her face a pale mask of disbelief and fury. Victor was nowhere to be seen. Damien led her to the center of the hall. Ethan ran to her, his face beaming with pride, and hugged her legs tightly. You did it, Mommy. It is time, Malcolm announced. The pack formed a circle around them. Damien turned to Elena, his amber eyes shining with a love so profound it made her heart ache. With this mark, he said, his voice ringing with formal authority for all to hear, I claim you before my pack and before the gods. He leaned in and gently, reverently, bit the juncture of her neck and shoulder, renewing the mark he had given her in secret on the mountain. This time, it was different. It wasn't just a bond between two souls. It was a connection to hundreds. She felt a jolt of energy, and then a flood of new sensations. She could feel the collective spirit of the pack, their loyalty, their strength, their fierce devotion to their alpha. She was no longer an outsider. She was a part of them, and they were a part of her. Adrian stepped forward, placing a simple, elegant circlet of woven silver and moonflowers on her head, the crown of the Luna. The moment it settled on her brow, the pack erupted. Howls of joy and celebration filled the air. Damien pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. My Luna, he whispered, for her ears only. That night, there was a great feast. Music and laughter filled the manor for the first time in years. Damien led Elena in the first dance, a slow, graceful waltz under the hall's chandeliers. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life, he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. Ethan, overjoyed, was passed from pack member to pack member, showered with affection and officially recognized as the future alpha. He was no longer a half-breed secret, but a cherished prince. Looking around at the celebrating pack, at her beaming son, at the adoring look in her soulmate's eyes, Elena knew she had made the right choice. She had fought for this, and she had won. Their family was finally whole, finally safe, or so she thought. 3 days after the celebration, the joy that had filled the manor curdled into terror. Ethan collapsed during a lesson with Adrian. One moment he was laughing, the next he was on the floor, his small body convulsing violently. Elena's scream brought Damien running. They rushed Ethan to the pack's infirmary, where Dr. Sophia Chen immediately went to work. Ethan's fever was dangerously high. His breathing was shallow, and blood was trickling from his nose. What's happening to him? Elena cried, her hand gripping Damien's with bruising force. Sophia worked with frantic efficiency, drawing blood, running tests. Her face grew paler and paler as she looked at the results on her monitor. It's a poison, she said, her voice grim. Something specifically designed to attack his lycanthropic DNA. It's trying to rip his two halves apart. I've only read about something like this in ancient texts. The lunar serum. Damien's face turned to stone. His eyes blazed with a murderous, golden light. Who? He snarled, the single word a promise of death. An investigation was launched immediately. Damien, in a cold fury, interrogated every pack member who had been near Ethan that day. Adrian, his face racked with guilt. suddenly remembered something. "Isabella," he said, his voice shaky. "She was here this morning. She gave Ethan a piece of candy. I didn't think anything of it." It was all Damien needed to hear. He and his enforcers stormed Isabella's chambers. She wasn't there. But the evidence was. Tucked away in a jewelry box was a small, empty glass vial with a faint, shimmering residue inside, and hidden beneath her mattress was a detailed plan, written in her own hand, outlining the plot to poison Ethan and frame Elena. "She's making a run for it," one of the guards reported. "Her car just left the Sinclair estate." Damien transformed, a blur of silver fur and righteous fury, and shot out of the manor. He intercepted her on the highway, his massive wolf form blocking the road, forcing her car to swerve into a ditch. He dragged her out of the vehicle, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised a painful death. He brought her back to the manor, throwing her at the feet of the assembled council, under the weight of Damien's alpha command. She broke. "It was Victor," she shrieked, her beautiful face twisted with fear and hatred. "It was his idea. The serum was his. He said it was the only way to preserve the bloodline, to free you from the human and her pathetic half-breed." As if on cue, the doors to the great hall opened. Victor Thornhill strode in, his face a mask of cold resolve. He looked at his son, at the cowering Isabella, and at the horrified faces of his pack. "She's right," Victor said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "I did it. For the good of the pack. For you, my son. So that you could be the strong alpha you were always meant to be." In the infirmary, Ethan was fading. The serum was ravaging his small body. "His human half is fighting his werewolf half," Sophia explained, her voice strained. "His systems are shutting down. I can't stop it. The only thing that could possibly overwhelm the poison is a massive transfusion of pure, untainted alpha blood." "Use mine," Damien said instantly, already rolling up his sleeve. "Damien, no," Sophia warned, her eyes filled with fear. "A transfusion of that magnitude. It would transfer a significant portion of your alpha essence. It could permanently weaken you. It could even kill you." Elena grabbed his arm. "No, Damien, there has to be another way." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love and determination that silenced all protest. "He is my son, Elena. My world did not begin until I met you, but it has no meaning without him." He turned to Sophia. "Do it now." The process was agonizing. They lay on adjacent beds, a tube connecting them. Elena watched in horror as the vibrant, healthy color drained from Damien's face. While a faint blush of life returned to Ethan's cheeks, she could feel Damien's life force, his immense alpha power, pouring out of him, the bond between them strained, crying out in pain. Damien grew weaker and weaker, his breathing becoming shallow, his powerful body trembling. "It's too much," Sophia said, her hand hovering over the line. "It's going to kill him." Damien was slipping into unconsciousness. Elena grabbed his hand, weaving her fingers through his. She closed her eyes and poured all of her own energy, all of her love, all of her Luna spirit, back into him through the bond. "Don't you dare leave me, Damien Thornhill," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Come back. We need you. I need you." For a moment that stretched into an eternity, there was nothing. Then, she felt a faint squeeze of her hand. When it was over, they lay side by side, exhausted but alive. Damien was pale and drastically weakened, but he was breathing steadily. And Ethan was sleeping peacefully, his fever gone. The healthy color returned to his cheeks. Later that night, Elena brought Ethan into Damien's recovery room. The three of them lay on the large bed together, a fragile but whole family. Ethan, now fully recovered, snuggled into his father's side. He stirred, his amber eyes fluttering open. He looked at the man who had saved him, a man he was only just getting to know, and for the very first time, he whispered the word that Damien had waited 7 years to hear. Damien's eyes filled with tears. He pulled his son and his mate closer, his heart overflowing. He had lost a measure of his power, but in that moment, holding his family in his arms, he had never felt stronger. The week following Ethan's recovery was quiet and tense. Damien's recuperation was slow. The massive transfer of his essence had taken a toll. He could walk, talk, and function. But his legendary alpha strength was gone, replaced by a very human-like fatigue. He tried to transform once, but could only manage a partial shift, his eyes glowing gold before the effort exhausted him. The pack was rudderless. Whispers started among the council members. An alpha who could not fully transform, who could not lead the hunt, was no alpha at all. They worried about their vulnerability to rival packs. Victor was confined to the manor's dungeon, a cold, stone cell reserved for the worst traitors. Isabella had been stripped of her status and exiled, sent back to the Sinclair pack in disgrace, a pariah in the werewolf world. Elena never left Damien's side. She became his strength. His fierce protector, she helped him walk the grounds, brought him his meals, and sat with him for hours in comfortable silence, their bond a steady, quiet current between them. Her love for him had nothing to do with his power. It was for the man, the father, the soul who was her other half. Ethan, fully recovered and bursting with energy, was a constant source of light in the gloomy manor. He seemed to understand that his father needed to heal, and he would spend hours curled up beside Damien, reading him stories from his picture books or drawing him pictures of their family, a smiling man, a smiling woman, and a little boy, with a giant silver wolf watching over them. One afternoon, Damien called Adrian and the Council of Elders to his study. Elena stood by his side, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I am not currently fit to lead," Damien announced, his voice quiet but firm. The admission took a visible toll on his pride, but it was necessary. "My priority right now is my family and my recovery. Therefore, I am temporarily ceding the duties of Alpha to my brother, Adrian. He will lead in my stead, with the full support of the council, until I am ready to resume my position." It was a shocking, unprecedented move, but one that showed true leadership. He was putting the pack's well-being above his own ego. The council, after a moment of stunned silence, agreed. That night, as Elena helped him get ready for bed, he pulled her close. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his face buried in her hair. "This isn't what you signed up for. A weakened mate, a pack in turmoil." She pulled back and framed his face with her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I signed up for you, Damien. Strong or weak, alpha or not. It has always been you. We will get through this, together." The trial of Victor Thornhill was a somber affair. It was held not in the Great Hall, but in the ancient stone circle deep in the woods where the pack's most serious judgments were passed. Adrian presided as acting alpha, with Malcolm Whitmore and the elders acting as judges. Victor stood before them, not in chains, but unbowed, his pride a suit of armor. He did not deny what he had done. He defended it. "I did it for the pack, he declared, his voice booming. "For our survival, I have watched for decades as our traditions have been eroded, our bloodlines weakened. Damien's obsession with this human was a poison that threatened to destroy everything our ancestors built. I did what was necessary to protect our future." Damien, still physically weak but radiating a quiet authority, stepped forward to face his father. "You speak of tradition and protection," he said, his voice laced with pain. "But you perverted those ideals. You twisted them into something ugly and hateful. You tried to murder your own grandson, your own blood, out of fear and prejudice." The confrontation was raw and heartbreaking, a father and son, torn apart by ideology. Then Malcolm Whitmore rose, his ancient face carved with sorrow. "There is more to this story," he said, his voice silencing the murmuring crowd. A secret that Victor has kept for over 30 years. He turned his piercing gaze on Victor. Tell them, old friend. Tell them about Liliana. Victor flinched as if struck. The name shattered his composure. Be silent, Malcolm. No more secrets, Malcolm insisted. The pack deserves the truth. He turned back to the crowd. 30 years ago, before Damien was born, Victor had another mate, his soulmate. Her name was Liliana, and she was human. A collective gasp swept through the circle. He loved her fiercely, Malcolm continued, but he was terrified. His own father preached the doctrine of blood purity. Victor hid her, kept their bond a secret, but she was discovered by our rivals. They used her as a weakness, a hostage, in a battle. She was caught in the crossfire, and Victor's hesitation to protect her, his fear of exposing his weakness, led to her death. The truth was a devastating blow. Victor's lifelong crusade against human mates was not born of principle, but of his own tragic failure, of a grief so profound it had twisted him into a monster. He had spent his life trying to prevent Damien from making the same mistake, but in doing so, he had become the very thing that had destroyed his own happiness. Father, Damien whispered, his anger replaced by a sudden, gut-wrenching understanding. I did it to save you from my fate, Victor choked out, his arrogance finally crumbling, revealing the broken man beneath. I would not let you suffer the same pain. You have become the thing you feared most, Damien said sadly, a wolf without a heart. The sentence was passed. Victor was stripped of all titles and authority. He was not to be executed, but exiled. He would live out the rest of his days alone, forever banished from the lands and the people he had tried to control. As the guards led him away, Victor stopped and looked back at his son, his eyes filled with a strange, prophetic sorrow. One day, when you have everything to lose, you will understand. In the quiet days that followed Victor's exile, a fragile peace settled over the manor. With the truth revealed, the pack's opinion of Elena had transformed from suspicion to a deep, empathetic respect. She was not the cause of the pack's turmoil, but a victim of its oldest wound. One afternoon, Malcolm Whitmore requested a private meeting with Elena in the vast, ancient library. He gestured for her to sit in a leather armchair by the fire. There is something you must know. Luna, he began, his pale gray eyes kind but serious. Something I have kept secret for a very long time, waiting for the right moment. Elena waited, a sense of nervous anticipation prickling her skin. I knew your parents, Elena, he said softly. The words struck her like a physical blow. My parents, I was told they died in a car crash. I grew up in an orphanage. I don't know anything about them. The car crash was a lie, a story created to protect you. Malcolm said gently, your parents were Dr. Alistair and Dr. Lena Rossi. They were brilliant geneticists, and they were my dear friends. He sighed, a heavy, sad sound. They weren't just any geneticists. Their secret field of study was us, lycanthropy. For years, they worked in secret, not to expose or weaponize us, but to understand, to build a bridge between our species. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. But that is not the most important part. Elena, you are not an ordinary human. What are you talking about? She whispered, her mind reeling. Your mother, Lena, was descended from a very rare bloodline, a line of humans with a unique genetic marker, a mutation that makes them extraordinarily resilient to supernatural energies. It allows them to form a soul bond with a werewolf without their mortal bodies breaking down from the strain. It's why your bond with Damien is so powerful, so pure. It's why you survived the trials. It's why you were able to anchor him, to pull him back from the brink when he saved Ethan. He rose and pulled an old, dusty book from a high shelf. He opened it to a page depicting a family tree. He pointed to a name at the very bottom. Elena Rossi. "You see," Malcolm said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, "your arrival here was not an accident. You are not a complication in the Thornhill legacy. You are the fulfillment of a prophecy. You, my dear, were born to be a Luna." Elena stared at the book, at her own name written in elegant script, her world tilting on its axis once again. She was not just a girl who had stumbled into a fantasy world. She was a part of it, woven into its very fabric by blood and destiny. And with this revelation came a burning, urgent question. If her parents didn't die in a car crash, what truly happened to them? The truth about her parents became an obsession. With Damien's strength slowly returning, he threw the full resources of the Thornhill pack into the investigation. Marcus, with his knack for digging up information, joined their cause. They started at the orphanage where Elena had been left as a baby. The records were sealed, but Damien's influence pried them open. They found a single name on the intake form, Malcolm Whitmore. He had been the one to bring her there, to create the cover story that had protected her for 28 years. Malcolm led them to a dilapidated, abandoned laboratory on the outskirts of the city. It was here, he explained, that Alistair and Lena Rossi had conducted their research. The place had been ransacked years ago, but some of their work remained, hidden in a secret basement compartment. They found boxes of old research notes, journals, and a series of video logs. As Elena watched the grainy footage of her parents, her heart ached with a sense of loss for the family she never knew. They were brilliant, passionate people, their faces filled with hope. Their research was revolutionary. They weren't just studying werewolves. They were developing a serum, not to cure lycanthropy, but to stabilize the hybrid gene. It was a formula that could have allowed werewolves and humans to have healthy children, to eliminate the risks that Victor had used to terrorize her. They were on the verge of a breakthrough that could have peacefully united their two worlds. And that was why they were killed. A page from her father's journal told the grim story. A radical faction of werewolves, a purist group known as the Blackthorn Covenant, had discovered their research. They believed any mingling of human and werewolf blood was a sacrilege. They saw the Rossis' work not as a bridge, but as a contamination. "They came for us tonight," Alistair had written, his handwriting shaky. "We're sending our work to Malcolm, and we're sending him our most precious creation, our Elena, our hope." The final video log was from her mother, recorded just moments before the attack. Her face was pale with fear, but her eyes shone with love. "Elena," she said, her voice trembling as she spoke to the camera, to the daughter she would never see grow up. "My sweet baby girl, we love you more than words can say. What we started, it was for you, for a world where you could be safe, where love knows no boundaries. Whatever you become, wherever you are, know that you were loved. Be the bridge, my daughter. Finish what we started." Elena collapsed into Damien's arms, sobbing. They were not just the tears of a grieving daughter, but the tears of a woman who had finally found her purpose. Her life was not an accident, it was a legacy. Hidden within the research, they found one final, chilling note. The leader of the Blackthorn Covenant, the one who had led the attack, was known to have a contact inside the Thornhill pack, a contact who knew about the Rossis' work and did nothing to stop the slaughter, a contact named Victor Thornhill. The revelations about her past and Victor's complicity in her parents' murders settled a new resolve in Elena. She would honor her parents' memory. She would finish their work. She would build the bridge. Damien, now almost fully recovered, stood by her side. His brush with death and the truth about his father had changed him. The arrogant, hot-headed alpha was gone, replaced by a wiser, more compassionate leader. He saw that the old ways of secrecy and blood purity had nearly destroyed them all. It was time for a change. Together, they presented a radical new vision to the Pack Council. Damien, with his power fully restored, announced a series of reforms. The old, isolationist laws were to be abolished. The Thornhill Pack would no longer hide in the shadows. They established an education program designed to teach the younger generation of werewolves about the human world and to foster understanding instead of prejudice. Elena, using her parents' research and her own unique position as a human Luna, became the Pack's ambassador. She began to discreetly build alliances with trusted humans in positions of power: scientists, politicians, activists, people like Dr. Sophia Chen, who believed in coexistence. Some of the older Pack members resisted, but the majority, especially the younger generation, embraced the change. They had seen the destruction wrought by the old hatreds. They were ready for a new era of peace. Their work began to attract attention from other Packs. Some, like the Sinclairs, were hostile, viewing the Thornhill reforms as a dangerous heresy, but others, more progressive Packs from across the country, were intrigued. Damien and Elena began planning a great summit, a conference of alphas to debate the future of their species. Amidst all the political and social upheaval, their personal lives flourished. The manor, once a place of fear and tension, was now a true home, filled with warmth and laughter. Their love, forged in fire and tested by tragedy, was stronger and deeper than ever. One evening, as they walked in the garden where Victor had once threatened her, Damien stopped under the light of the rising moon. He didn't get down on one knee. He simply took her hands in his amber eyes glowing with a love that encompassed all they had been through. He slid a ring onto her finger. It wasn't the moonstone ring from their first engagement. This was the ancestral ring of the Thornhill Lunas, an ancient, intricately woven band of silver and gold, passed down for 1,000 years. It had belonged to his mother, and her mother before her. "I think we're long overdue for a wedding, don't you?" he said, his voice soft. "Marry me, Elena, officially, before our Pack, our friends, and the whole world. If they'll have us, be my wife, my Luna, my forever." Tears of pure joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered, her heart so full it felt like it would burst. "Always, yes." The 2 months leading up to the wedding were a joyous flurry of activity. Elena and Damien were determined that their union would be a symbol of the new era. They were building a perfect blend of the human and werewolf worlds. Elena designed her own wedding dress, a simple, elegant gown of white silk that would allow her to move freely. Adrian, overjoyed to be Damien's best man, helped him plan a ceremony that incorporated ancient Pack traditions with modern human customs. Ethan, buzzing with excitement, was given the crucial role of ring bearer. Invitations were sent not just to the Thornhill Pack, but to their human allies, Marcus and a beaming Sophia Chen, and to the alphas of several other Packs who had shown support for their progressive vision. It was to be more than a wedding. It was a political statement. The manor was filled with a sense of hopeful celebration. Pack members who had once glared at Elena with suspicion now came to her for advice, for a kind word, for the calm, steady leadership she provided. She was their Luna, not by trial or by title, but by the love and respect she had earned. Marcus arrived a few days before the ceremony. He pulled Elena aside for a quiet talk by the lake. "I have to admit," he said, a genuine smile on his face, "I was worried. I thought this world would swallow you whole, but you didn't just survive it. Elle, you changed it. You belong here." He looked over at Damien, who was teaching Ethan how to skip stones across the water. "He makes you happy. That's all I ever wanted." The night before the wedding, Elena and Damien escaped the bustling manor and went to their cabin, the place where their story had both begun and been reborn. They sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the almost full moon rise over the trees. "Are you scared?" she asked softly. "Terrified," he admitted with a small laugh. "I've faced down feral wolves and rival alphas. I've run a billion-dollar corporation. But the thought of standing up in front of everyone tomorrow and not crying like a baby when I see you walking towards me, that's true fear." He squeezed her hand. "But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You, me, Ethan. This is right. This is forever." He gave her a small handwritten note. It wasn't a long poem or a grand declaration. It was just 3 simple sentences. "You found me in the dark. You are my light. You are my home." She leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart at peace. The long, painful journey had led them here, to the cusp of a new beginning, together. They were married in the heart of the forest, in the ancient stone circle, under the light of a glorious full moon. The trees were strung with hundreds of fairy lights, casting a magical, ethereal glow on the proceedings. Elena, escorted by a proud Marcus, walked down an aisle lined with white moonflowers. She saw Damien waiting for her, breathtakingly handsome in a formal black alpha's tunic, and the look in his eyes, a look of pure, unadulterated adoration, made her feel like the only woman in the world. The ceremony was a beautiful fusion of 2 worlds. Malcolm Whitmore officiated. Speaking of destiny, of bridges, and of a love strong enough to unite 2 worlds, when it came time for the vows, Damien spoke from the heart, his deep voice thick with emotion, promising to be her partner, her protector, and her home, for all of his days. Elena, her own voice trembling with tears, promised to be his anchor, his light, and his love, for all of hers. Ethan, looking adorable in a tiny tuxedo, performed his duty as ring-bearer with solemn importance. As they exchanged the ancient rings, the entire Thornhill pack, standing in a great circle around them, shifted into their wolf forms. It was the ultimate sign of respect and loyalty. Then, as Malcolm pronounced them mates for life, a single, unified howl of celebration rose from over 200 wolves, a joyous primal symphony that echoed through the forest. Damien pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their past, their present, and their future. This was not just the union of 2 people, it was the birth of a new age. The reception that followed was a joyous, wild affair. Humans and werewolves danced together under the stars. Music and laughter echoed through the trees. Elena watched as Ethan was spun around the dance floor by a laughing Adrian, as Marcus and Sophia shared a quiet, meaningful conversation, and as alphas from rival packs clapped Damien on the shoulder, not as competitors, but as allies. Their family was bigger than she had ever imagined. It was strange, and loud, and a little bit wild, but it was hers. And as Damien led her away from the party towards their own private escape, she knew she had never been happier. Damien led her by the hand, deeper into the moonlit woods, away from the sounds of the party. He brought her to the place where it had all begun, his cabin. But it was transformed. The rustic, masculine space was now filled with hundreds of candles and fragrant, night-blooming jasmine. A fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and a bed, piled high with soft furs and silk sheets, had been placed before it. "I wanted our new beginning to start in the same place our story did," he murmured, his voice a low, intimate caress in the quiet room. He turned to her, his amber eyes dark with an intensity that made her breath catch. He slowly, reverently, began to unbutton the back of her wedding gown, his fingers tracing a path of fire on her skin. The dress pooled at her feet, leaving her standing before him in the soft, flickering candlelight. "You are so beautiful," he breathed, his gaze roaming over her with a worshipful reverence. "My wife, my Luna." He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, laying her down gently on the soft furs. He did not take her with the fierce passion of a wolf, but with the deep, soulful tenderness of a man who had waited a lifetime for this moment. Every touch was electric, every kiss a revelation. The soul bond between them, now fully forged and sanctified, blazed to life. It was no longer just a current of feeling and emotion. It was a true joining. She could feel his thoughts, his profound love, his utter devotion, as clearly as if he had spoken them aloud, and he could feel hers in return. There were no more secrets, no more walls between them. They were one soul in two bodies. They made love for hours, a slow, languid dance of discovery and reunion. It was a celebration of everything they had survived and a promise of everything that was to come. They spoke of the past with forgiveness, of the present with joy, and of the future with unbound hope. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, they lay watching the fire dance, the sounds of the forest. Once a source of terror for her, were now a comforting lullaby. "You are everything, Elena," Damien whispered against her hair, his voice thick with sleep and contentment. "Everything I never knew I needed, my mate, my wife, my forever." She snuggled closer, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "You and Ethan," she murmured, "are my family, my pack." She smiled into the darkness. "My home." Under the watchful eye of the moon, bathed in the warm glow of the fire, the Alpha and his Luna finally found their peace. 6 months passed in a state of blissful, productive peace. Life at Thornhill Manor had found a new rhythm, one of hope and progress. Damien and Elena ruled as true partners. He led the pack with a newfound wisdom and compassion, while she acted as its heart and its conscience, her bridge-building efforts slowly but surely changing the werewolf world. The education program was a resounding success. The younger pack members were thriving, more open-minded and less fearful than any generation before them. The alliance of progressive packs was growing, their summit planned for the following year. Ethan, now 7, was flourishing. He was a happy, well-adjusted boy, adored by the pack and deeply loved by his parents. He was learning to control his burgeoning werewolf abilities under Damien's gentle guidance, but he was also allowed to just be a kid. He still loved to draw, his subjects now expanding to include portraits of his growing, eclectic family. Marcus and Dr. Sophia Chen had found an unexpected happiness together, their shared devotion to Elena and Ethan blossoming into a quiet, mature love. Adrian, as the pack's second in command, had met his own soulmate, a fierce, intelligent she-wolf from an allied pack in the north. One crisp autumn morning, Elena found Damien in his study, looking over pack reports. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his neck, resting her chin on his shoulder. "I have some news," she said, a smile evident in her voice. He turned in his chair, pulling her onto his lap. "Good news. I hope—" She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. His eyes widened, his keen senses and the power of the bond telling him the truth before she even spoke the words. "We're pregnant," she whispered. A slow, dazzling smile spread across Damien's face. He let out a whoop of pure joy. Lifting her up and spinning her around, he pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes shining with tears. "A baby," he breathed. "Another one." Sophia had already confirmed it. Thanks to Elena's unique bloodline and her parents' research, this pregnancy was perfectly healthy and stable. That evening, they told Ethan. He stared at the ultrasound picture, his amber eyes wide with wonder. "A sister?" he asked, his voice a reverent whisper. "We hope so," Elena said, smiling. Ethan's face broke into a grin of pure, unadulterated excitement. He was going to be a big brother. Later that night, the 3 of them, soon to be 4, stood on the balcony, looking out at the peaceful territory. Damien's arm was around Elena's waist, his other hand resting protectively on her stomach. Ethan stood between them, holding both their hands. It was a perfect portrait of a family, finally whole, finally safe, their future stretching before them, as bright and limitless as the star-dusted sky. The first attack came without warning. A patrol on the northern border was found slaughtered, their bodies bearing the marks of a swift, brutal, and highly coordinated assault. It was not the work of rogue wolves or a rival pack. The scent left behind was old, laced with a fanatical hatred. Damien knew it instantly. The Blackthorn Covenant, the purest faction that had murdered Elena's parents. They had been dormant for decades,